Hi, class. Welcome back. We are still on the heart, and we're going to be looking at the blood flow through the heart. Let's have an understanding of what's going on. Now, in a previous video, you heard me briefly mention that the color of blood on the right-hand side, including the color of these blood vessels, are blue, and on the left-hand side, they're red. Blue is deoxygenated. So if we see here blue, oxygenated poor, which is the same thing as saying deoxygenated. And on the left-hand side, it's oxygenated blood or oxygen-rich blood. All right, so that's why we see blue on the right-hand side and we see red on the left-hand side. So we are going to start with number 10. We're going to start here. This is the starting point. We are going to assume that the heart has pumped all the oxygenated blood up to the neck, up to the brain, up to the head, to the left, to the right shoulder, to the left shoulder, all the way down to the fingers. It has pumped it down into the abdomen, into the thigh, into the leg, into the feet, all of the organs. And now the blood has dumped its oxygen into the tissues and into the cells and the organs so that the mitochondria of those cells can utilize that oxygen for energy production. Remember the energy production, that's ATP. It happens with the Krebs cycle. Okay, so now we have to find a way of bringing the deoxygenated blood back into the heart. And the starting point would be number 1, which is the right atrium. But how does the blood get into the right atrium? 3 ways. We'll call this 10A, we'll call this 10B, and then we'll call this hole 10C. So we have 10A, 10B, and 10C. A, B, C. We have the superior vena cava, that's here. Inferior vena cava, that's here. And the coronary sinus is this hole here, which is going to bring the deoxygenated blood from the heart muscle itself back to the heart. The heart is muscle, so the heart needs oxygen as well. It needs a blood supply as well. So that after the heart does its pumping and the muscle does its job, the deoxygenated blood has to find a way back into the right atrium. So it's going to dump it into the veins, and all the veins dump into this coronary sinus 10C to make it into number 1, which is the right atrium, deoxygenated blood. So after the pressure, after the blood starts pooling and filling up this right atrium, let me change that for a second. Let's make it blue. Let's erase everything here. Let's make this blue because all the deoxygenated blood is filling up in here, right, in the right atrium. Now, as this pressure builds up and builds up and builds up, the right atrium says, hey, I can't handle any more pressure. I got to get the blood out of here. So let's move it into the next chamber, which will be the right ventricle. Number 2, the right ventricle. Now, how does the blood go from the right atrium, number 1, into the right ventricle, number 2? Well, it's got to push open a valve that's right here. And the name of the valve is called the tricuspid valve. Tri means 3, it has 3 cusps. The tricuspid valve. So what pushes this open? Well, the pressure builds up, this valve opens, and now the deoxygenated blood from the right atrium is going to go from superior to inferior, right? It's going to push down, and it's going to start to fill that right ventricle. Now, all the blood empties from the right atrium, and it is now in that right ventricle. So what happens here is that the right ventricle pressure builds and builds and builds. Now, most of the blood from the right atrium spills down into the right ventricle because of gravity, right? I mean, gravity is going to take it from here to here naturally. And whatever blood is left, there are some muscles here that look like these streaks called pectinate muscles. Pectinate muscles. The pectinate muscles are found in the atrium. They'll contract and push out whatever remaining blood is left in the atrium. Maybe another 10% or 15% of blood is actively pushed into the right ventricle. Okay, so now this pressure in the right ventricle builds and builds and builds, and the same thing that happened in the right atrium is going to happen in the right ventricle. It's saying, hey, I got to get the blood out of here. The pressure's too great. Let's get it out. So what the ventricle does, what the atrium did, was it contracted superior to inferior, from above down. However, when the ventricles contract, they're going to contract from inferior to superior, from inferior to superior. Let me change the color of the arrow, black. So when the ventricles contract, they're going to contract from inferior to superior, inferior to superior. When the ventricles contract inferior to superior, the blood is pushed up, which takes this valve and forces it shut. The name of that valve was the tricuspid valve. It forces it shut. You know the heart makes sounds, lub dub, lub dub, lub dub. That's the lub sound, lub. Valves only make their sounds when they close. It's like clapping your hands. You don't hear the noise when your hands move apart and separate. You hear the noise when the hands come together and clap. Now, that's what happened when the blood went from here, inferior to superior. It shut that tricuspid. As the blood goes inferior to superior here, there's another valve. It's like a push valve. And this push valve opens. This push valve is called the pulmonary semilunar. So in the heart, we have two types of valves. We have AV valves, atrioventricular valves, meaning they're between the atrium and the ventricles. And then we have semilunar valves. The AV valves are called the tricuspid, and bicuspid. So AV, between the atrium and the ventricle. So the tricuspid is on the right side, and the bicuspid here is on the left side. The semilunars have two types. One's called the pulmonary semilunar, and the other is called the aortic semilunar. So the pulmonary semilunar is right here. As the blood pushes up, the pulmonary semilunar opens, and that deoxygenated blood is pushing into number 3, which is called the pulmonary trunk. And the pulmonary trunk branches, one going to the left side, one going to the right side, and those are called pulmonary arteries. Remember, arteries pump blood away from the heart. So the arteries are pumping blood away from the heart and into the lungs, just like here. Here's the pulmonary trunk. Here's the left pulmonary artery. Here's the right pulmonary artery. They're blue. These arteries are blue. Why are they blue? Because they're carrying deoxygenated blood. And then it brings that deoxygenated blood into the lungs. You breathe in air. We have the oxygen, and now it's going to go into the red blood vessels that are called the pulmonary veins. Veins bring blood to the heart. So now, number 5 are the pulmonary veins on the left side as well as the right side. And they are going to bring the oxygenated blood into what chamber? They're going to bring oxygenated blood into the left atrium, number 6. And the same thing that happened over here on the right atrium is going to happen in the left atrium. So now on this side, we're going to have, we can make this red now, we're going to have oxygenated blood fill up. It's going to fill up the left atrium, and the pressure is going to build and build and build. And what's going to happen is now the pressure is going to build, and it's going to say, hey, we got to get the blood out of here and let it escape and get into the next chamber. So that's going to push open this valve, which is called the bicuspid valve, which is the AV valve, atrioventricular valve. So the bicuspid opens, the left atrium will passively let the blood dump into the left ventricle, and that blood's going to fill up and fill up and fill up. As the blood in the left atrium is pumped, right, it's going to empty. It's going to pull out, right? Passively, it's going to come out, and then the pectinate muscles kick in and push out the rest of it. Now, as the blood is pooling and filling up the left ventricle, same thing, the pressure is going to build and build and build and build, and the body goes, we got to get the blood out of here. Now, remember, the atriums contracted superior to inferior. However, the ventricles contract inferior to superior. So when it goes inferior to superior, it shuts this valve. What is this valve here called? It's going to shut the bicuspid. The other name for the bicuspid is also known as mitral valve. Mitral valve. If you ever know someone had a mitral valve prolapse, that's the valve. Mitral valve. So that shuts. That's the lub sound. That's the lub sound. When the blood goes inferior to superior, it forces this pulmonary, not this pulmonary, my bad. It forces this semilunar valve open, and that semilunar is called aortic semilunar. So the left ventricle pushes the blood, the aortic semilunar valve opens, and now it's pushing it into number 8, which is the arch of the aorta. This is the arc of the aorta. And that oxygenated blood is pushing up into this large blood vessel on the right side, called the brachiocephalic artery. And these two on the left, I'm going to abbreviate here. This one is called the left common carotid, and this one is called the left subclavian artery. So the left common carotid, that goes up the left side of the neck, up the neck into the brain. And the left subclavian artery goes subclavian, goes under the left clavicle, down the shoulder into the left arm. So these two feed the neck and the arm on the left side. And on the right side, there's one main branch called the brachiocephalic. But if you look at the name, brachio means arm, and cephalic means head. So from this will eventually branch into these two, but on the right side. It'll branch into a right common carotid and a right subclavian. Pretty cool how that happens, isn't it? And this cycle happens over and over and over again. So after all the oxygenated blood gets to the head, the neck, the trunk, the feet, and it's deoxygenated, it finds a way back into number 10, the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and from the heart itself into the coronary sinus, into the right atrium, into the right ventricle, into the pulmonary trunk, into the pulmonary arteries, into the lungs. The lungs pick up the oxygen, drive it into the pulmonary vein, into the left atrium, through the bicuspid, into the left ventricle, left ventricle pushes it up through the aortic semilunar valve into the arch of the aorta, and the cycle continues and continues. These three go to the head, neck, and upper extremity, and then you see it arches and descends, comes down, and right here, it's going to go to the lower limbs. That's pretty much the general flow of the blood flow through the heart. I do have a video here. I have several of them that you can watch where I draw this out several times. So please take the time to do that. Be able to draw out the blood flow. Okay, when we come back, we'll get into some of the major blood vessels of the heart.